So I'm going to show you how to get your vocals from sounding like this.
From the dark will rise again, with eyes wild like fire. No turning back, live no regret. We'll be wild like fire.
To this.
From the dark will rise again, with eyes wild like fire. No turning back, live no regret. We'll be wild like fire.
So today we're going to learn how to process vocals, starting off with some volume shaping, and then we go on to gating and de-essing, then some dynamics, compression, saturation, some EQ, and then finally reverb and delay. So I've got a vocal here. It comes from one of my own tracks called Another Life, and the vocals by a great singer called Geneva Lane, and it's recorded in the studio. So we'll get stuck in and start with our volume automation. Now this is a little trick that I learnt, that it helps to helps the compressor to do its job, because it takes some of the really loud bits of the vocal and evens them out, and that'll mean that once it hits the compression stage, the compressor can work better. So that's what we're going to do, and I'm going to start off doing this visually and finish off with my ears. It's always important to use your ears in preference to your eyes, but we can just see some of the bigger peaks, and I'm just using the envelope control in the clip to take some of the larger peaks out of the vocal. And I will listen back to this and make sure that my ears are agreeing with my eyes. This bit at the start is quite quiet. I'm going to move that up a bit. And this just, it neatens up the dynamics a bit straight off the bat. So I'm going to listen back to it here, just on its own.
From the dark will rise again, with eyes wild like fire. No turning back, live no regret. We'll be wild like fire.
I'm pretty happy with that, except for the last note. It tails off a little bit, and I want that volume to remain consistent. So I'll just listen back to that again.
From the dark will rise again. We'll be wild like fire.
Bit too much maybe, but that overall that's better.
Like fire.
Okay, I'm happy with that now. So that's our first stage over with. The next step is to add some plugins. So we'll go to audio effects, and pretty standard thing to go with for the first part of your vocal chain is gates. Gating just means that the background noise is cut out in between the phrases of the vocal. It's not a terrible problem with this particular vocal, but it can be with some others if there's background noise acoustically or some interference. So soft reducer, I find, is a good one. And all we're going to do is we're going to work with the threshold control and make sure that this meter, which I'm pointing at with my mouse pointer, it's showing some volume reduction when there are gaps. So here we go.
With eyes wild like fire. No
so in that, you heard a gap there. Look for another one and you'll see it coming in.
We'll be wild like
so it's
fire.
just working in those gaps. That's what we want with the gate. So that's all we need to do with gating. The next part is de-essing. Now, Ableton doesn't have its own dedicated de-esser, so we're going to have some fun and we're going to try and make one. So bear with me. I will go through it quite quickly, but you can rewind on the video if you need to recap at all. The compressor has some hidden functions that I'm going to open up. And I'm going to click sidechain, headphone monitoring, EQ, and I'm going to make sure the input comes from Vox. This is our vocal channel. And the idea with a de-esser is that it gets all the S-type sounds or any fizzy high frequency sounds that we call sibilants it's going to pull those down because once you do a lot of processing on a vocal, those sibilant sounds can become very obvious and they can be quite distracting. So that's what we're trying to get rid of as we DS. And what we're going to do is try and find those sibilant sounds. So I've got a filter activated here, bandpass filter, this one here that I'm pointing at, and I'm going to move it up to about 10k in the frequency. And a narrow Q value is what we need, of about 3. And so you can hear when she says the D of dark, there's a real hiss comes through there, and so that means we've found what we're looking for, and now the compressor is going to do the job of pulling those, pulling the overall volume down when those sounds, when those frequencies come through. And a little word: this isn't a totally proper de-esser, but it'll work okay for our purposes. A ratio of 10, quite hard ratio, is what we're looking for. And I just want to see this gain reduction meter that I'm pointing at. I want to see it popping down when the S sounds or sibilant sounds come in. So I move my threshold until that's happening. So it's just a little bit of gain reduction just to neaten up that sound. I'm going to take my monitoring off, and we can see that when those sibilants come through, there's a bit of gain reduction. So that's our de-essing done. The next phase of activity is EQ. Now I like to talk about EQ in terms of EQ to correct and then EQ to effect. We start with EQ to correct problems, to neaten up the sound, take any of the nasty stuff we don't want out of the sound, so that when we process it, when we compress it, things like that, it's going to work better. So very standard practice is to start off with a high pass filter at about 80. So that's, you just see here, it's a very tight high pass. When you see here, I put that about 80 hertz, and that gets rid of low frequency rumble. That's pretty standard. And then I'm going to grab this frequency here, and I'm going to give it a very narrow Q value. And this is where we search for any boom in the vocal, which can be a common problem. So I'm really boosting this frequency. I'm going to sweep it around and try and find any boom that pops up.
From the dark will rise again.
As I sweep around,
with eyes wild like fire.
if you got keen ears, you'll hear that boom. So now I've found it, I widen my Q a little bit, but not too much, because when we're cutting, we often use quite narrow Q values, and I'm going to pull it down, not too much, just 2 or 3 dB, just to correct that sound a little bit. So that's our EQ to correct, over and done with. We get onto the compressor now. I have a very standard setting I use with vocals. I go for a ratio of 4, and we'll bring the attack back to about 10 milliseconds, which is sort of medium to fast attack, and then back the release off to about 300. So it's sort of medium level compression we're working with. And what I want to do is bring the threshold down as the vocal plays until I see somewhere between 3 and 6 dB, which is where I'm pointing with my mouse. That's about it. We don't get very good metering on this compressor, but
no turning back, live no regret.
That's the sort of thing we want.
We'll be wild like fire.
We want the quietest bits of that vocal to have no compression. That's the rule of thumb.
From the dark will rise.
So we need to see the compressor disappearing
with
just on the very quietest bits of the vocal. So I'm happy with that. Just something to say at this point. All the work I've done is in isolation from the music, because this is standard stuff I do with every vocal I work with. And those little acoustic problems I was working with the EQ, you can do that in isolation, but now we have to start working with the music and making sure this vocal fits with in terms of a mix. So we're starting to give some flavour to the sound now.
From the dark will rise again.
And the next stage I want to go through is some saturation, with which we will do that with the saturator, which is a pretty cool plugin that Ableton have now, which enables you to give a bit of analog warmth to the sound. I'm going to push the drive up to about 5 dB, and when you drive these things, it's good to back the output off a little bit as well.
From the dark will rise again.
And that's pushing the mid-range and giving some warmth to the sound, gives it a bit of personality, and makes it sit out in the mix more. And the reason I put that saturator at this point is because we've already corrected acoustic problems. We've already compressed it, so leveled out the dynamics, and as it hits the saturator now, we've got quite even dynamics, and it's going to get a consistent amount of warmth and saturation. So that's the reason for the order of the plugins. Now we move on to EQ to effect. I talked about EQ to correct, now we talk about EQ to effect the sound, and this is to give flavour to the vocal and to make it sit with the music the way I want it to. So let's listen back. This is where we use our ears.
With eyes wild
bring the gain down a bit of the level on the track. So for me it sounds a bit thin. So I'm going to get this part of the EQ and I'm going to do a very wide boost. Now if I switch back to our earlier EQ, we did a fairly narrow cut in here just to correct a problem, but now I'm doing a wide boost to just shape the sound.
From the dark will rise again.
Give it some more body.
With eyes
I'm just going to bring it in and out to see the difference.
No turning back, live no.
So that's actually really filled out the sound in a way that I like and given it some body. Finally, a little trick I do is some final limiting on the vocal. I've found when I've been given vocals to do remixes with or to produce tracks with, the ones that always sounded best are the ones that I can see have had a bit of limiting done as the final stage. So I find that's something that works quite well.
From the dark will rise
so I just bring up the gain until I see the limiter coming in.
No turning back,
and I bring the ceiling down just to manage my output level.
From the dark will rise again.
So if you look down here at the metering, you'll see it's just limiting now and again. That's the sort of thing I want, and that's going to help the vocal to sit right out in front, which is what we want with vocals. We want them to be very clear most of the time. So we're almost there. Logic, or Ableton, I should say, has some reverb and delay that comes up automatically when you load up a new session. So I'm going to do a reverb send and a delay send. Just bring them up here. Just something to bring up is that I've changed the delay to a ping pong delay, which I think just sounds much nicer.
From the dark will rise again.
It suits a lot of reverb and delay. This
no turning back, live no regret.
Pretty happy with that.
Be wild like fire.
Final little step here is going to be some volume automation, and the reason for that is that if you can see visually here with the backing track, if I make it a bit bigger for you so you can see, it starts off quite quiet and it moves up in volume. And our vocal, we've evened out the dynamics in our vocal, and that's going to give us a bit of control, because now I know that this vocal's got a pretty consistent level. I can now shape that level at the other end with our level, our channel level, and I'm just going to move that so it follows the music, and then, all important, I'll now use my ears to make sure it's sitting properly.
From the dark will rise again, with eyes wild like fire. No turning back, live no regret. We'll be wild like fire.
I'll just listen to the start again.
From the dark we'll rise
Bring it up a little
again,
bit.
with eyes wild like fire. No turning back, live no regret.
I'm just moving those around to use my ears to make it consistent level with the backing track.
From the dark we'll rise again.
Okay, that's a good level. So just to recap, we began with Geneva Lane's vocal for my track Another Life. We started off with volume shaping. We then went on to gating, de-essing. We then worked with compression, then on to saturation. We had EQ to correct, EQ to effect. Then moved on to reverb and delay and finished off with volume automation, and there we had a finished vocal.
From the dark